I'm not suggesting Chelsea are going to get relegated, but I also don't think that their model will last if they don't qualify for Europe on a regular basis. There's every chance. I think what they're doing is a huge risk.
I think it's organised chaos. They've tried to adopt some form of a Moneyball model. Boehly is now in charge of the Chelsea business. The remainder of the business is run by the nerds and the dweebs.
The charges at Chelsea relate to payments outside of contracts.
It's the equivalent of handing yourself in at a police station as part of a mitigation.
If they are found guilty of that, the sanctions, this is not slap on the wrist territory. These are some serious sanctions.
Hello and welcome to How Football Works, a new talkSPORT show breaking down the ins and outs of the business side of the beautiful game. I'm Olly Clink, thanks for your company. Joining me today is football finance expert Kieran Maguire and the Managing Director and Chairman of Charlton Athletic, Jim Rodwell. Welcome to you both. Kieran, have you come down off the ceiling yet after Brighton's win over Manchester United at the weekend?
Not quite. You can't. A last-minute winner is always fantastic, but to beat a side as prestigious as Manchester United is doubly exciting. But I'll try and keep calm throughout the rest of our talk together, though.
Looking forward to that. And Jim, for you, 3 wins from 3 in the league for Charlton. Very good start to the season.
It's gone very well. Yeah, we take nothing for granted, but it's been a good start. No goals conceded, and we seem to be moving in the right direction, certainly.
I'm sure the fans are very happy with that as well. Gentlemen, if we start with one of the biggest stories of the summer, and that's been the business of Chelsea, a club that can't seem to find themselves out of the headlines at the moment, despite a big win at the weekend as well. But Kieran, just firstly, if you could break down for us how Clearlake and Todd Boehly are running the business side of the football club.
I think it's organised chaos from Clearlake, in the sense that they've tried to adopt some form of a Moneyball model. They've targeted younger players. They've been willing to pay high fees. The noises we're getting out of the club is that the players coming in are on relatively low wages, although I'm a little bit sceptical with regards to that. And I guess the big question is how this has all been funded. Yeah, they've spent in excess of £1.2 billion since Clearlake acquired the club. The payments appear to have been split through, first of all, spreading the cost in the accounts over a long period of time, which no other clubs have done before, through giving the players long-term contracts. Secondly, I don't think Chelsea get enough credit for this. They're very good at shifting players out of the club at large fees and large profits, especially when it comes to academy players. So if you take a look at Mason Mount, Conor Gallagher, Mark Guehi, Tammy Abrahams, and so on, they've all gone for good fees, and those are pure profit. And the other thing, and I think this is sort of an unexpected benefit of acquiring the club effectively from the government, that they just acquired the assets of Chelsea to a large extent. There were no mortgages on real estate assets, and that's allowed them to sell hotels, car parks, and potentially the women's team as well to other parts of the Clearlake empire. And that's booked a profit, which has contributed to the ability to buy players in.
And Todd Boehly before has worked in Major League Baseball as well. And would it be fair to say, Kieran, that he's tried to follow that kind of model? Would you be able to break that down as well?
Yes, I mean, the model which that they have done is to sign players on very long contracts. I think what is different between MLB and football is that as far as some of the MLB signs are concerned, and they do have cost control rules there, that the players are being paid after the contract expires, which is intriguing. It's good for cash flow. It's good for, I guess, the player from a taxation point of view as well. It's part of their long-term planning. So I don't think that's been applied in the Premier League, but certainly the adoption of a data analytical approach, and they've recruited from Brighton, and I think the Brighton model is very much based on data analytics as well. So that appears to be the strategy. Whereas I think under Roman Abramovich, the players being recruited, the coach tended to have a greater input and emphasis. and the commitment to data and the commitment to analytics was less significant.
Jim, as a managing director yourself, what have you made of the way Chelsea have conducted their business? Because, as Kieran mentioned, it's not something we've seen in football before.
Well, I look at it with a little bit of envy. Spending that kind of money with absolute gay abandon must be interesting in itself. I think I look at Chelsea slightly differently. Kieran says chaos, and I guess there is an element of that. I do think they've got a plan. Whether that's the right plan or the wrong plan, only time will tell ultimately. I do think they've got a plan to drive down their cost base eventually and become compliant with things like PSR. Kieran's quite right, they end up selling the car park and the women's team, but you can only do that once. When you've sold it, you've sold it. So that might be a quick fix for the time being, but I don't think that's a long-term strategy by any sense of the word. So I think, I was looking at this last night actually in anticipation, and it is, what they've done in MLB is really interesting. I think in the beginning, I don't think that the Todd Boehly Clear Lake regime was seen as a great success, but they've gone on to be very successful subsequently. And let's, not forget, these are smart people. They've made a lot of money. They've been incredibly successful in business, and they're doing different things. I sound like an apologist for Chelsea. I don't know these people. I've never met these people, but I think it's quite interesting what they're doing, and people seem to thrive on clubs spending money, and that's what they're doing, and they get slightly chastised for it. I'm the same as Kieran. Some of the figures that I'm seeing bandished about in terms of wages for the incoming players, I am also slightly sceptical about this. I read a figure with Jonathan Northcroft yesterday, was talking about an average figure of £60,000 a week. I would be surprised if their average wage was anywhere like £60,000 a week. They are still signing some very elite, very expensive players, predominantly from Kieran's football club. So I think there is a plan. I think it's different. Whether it's the right or the wrong one, we shall wait and see. But I suppose you have to give them the benefit of the doubt for a period of time.
As you say, these plans have worked eventually for them in baseball, but do you think there'll be some fans looking at this going, well, hang on, these are two totally different sports, and the kind of methods you used in baseball might not work in football, and that's a big risk?
There's every chance. I think what they're doing is a huge risk. It's they managed to acquire the football club under slightly unique circumstances, but there is definitely risk associated to what they're going to do. The obvious difference between the MLB and the Premier League is clearly promotion. Well, it's clearly relegation. I'm not suggesting Chelsea are going to get relegated, but I also don't think that their model will last for too long if they don't qualify for Europe on a regular basis. I mean, that's the holy grail. Certainly, you look at the Europa League, Chelsea have got to start competing to get into the top four to make those revenues stack up, because if the revenues don't stack up and you've sold all your asset, they are going to have huge issue with profit and sustainability regulations.
Kieran, you've talked about this sale of car parks and hotels and the women's team. Would you be able to break down for us what Chelsea have done there and how they've gone about it?
Well, under the present PSR rules, you are allowed to sell real estate assets to anybody, and that includes other parts of a group, and that's what we've seen with regards to Chelsea. If we take a look at their 2023 accounts, there were property asset sales which brought in around about £76 million worth of profit. That allows the club to spend significantly more than that because of the way that contracts are organised for accounting purposes. If you sign a £100 million player on a 5-year contract, that works out as an annual cost, and we call that amortization of £20 million a year. What Chelsea have done, and they've certainly got first mover advantage on this, is that they've signed those similar players on 8-year contracts. So 100 divided by 8 allows a PSR cost of £12.5 million a year. So by selling the property for the profit of 76 million, it allows you to sign 5 players, 5 or 6 players on £100 million a year deals, and still from an accounting point of view, you're fairly neutral. So that's where Chelsea have been ahead of the market. There was a reaction from other chief executives of Premier League clubs and also from UEFA. And I must say, I think that's been harsh. I think Chelsea have done absolutely nothing wrong here, as we've been saying. They've taken on a huge risk, and we wait to see over the course of the next 4 to 5 years whether that risk bears fruit or not. But I don't think that they've done anything wrong at all. And just because something's different doesn't mean it should be discouraged. It does give the players a degree of certainty with regards to their future earnings and their future careers. And there's a case for saying that that should be applauded. But a combination of the way that you book profits for both players and for real estate assets has allowed Chelsea to effectively, for every £1 that's come in, that's allowed them to spend 6 or 7 on the market.
And I think that's interesting as well in terms of the contract lengths. Again, I think it's not a bad idea at all. If you're signing a player for £50 million, you've got to make the assumption that you believe that this player is the finished article, that this is a player that's going to contribute to you in the long term. Why not sign them for 8 years? When a player signs a 5-year contract, 8-year contract, the club tends to be in control of the situation. As it gets towards the end of that contract, post-Bosman, that's when the player takes control of that situation. So what it does give you, as well as all the accounting techniques that Kieran's just spoken about, it does give you certainty, and it gives you control over that player's future as well.
Does it not leave you in some sticky situations? For instance, at the moment, we're seeing with Raheem Sterling potentially that he's going to be leaving the club, and he's still got 3 years left on his contract.
It could do. You could have a player with 6 years left on his contract who, God forbid, gets a career-ending injury. Now, there are mechanisms to cope with things like that, but undoubtedly, it's like football. Football is like life. You never get everything right and you rarely get everything wrong. But for me, I actually think if I'm Chelsea, 8-year contracts are not a bad idea at all. And again, I think it's something that's far more commonplace in the MLB, isn't it, in American sports?
Do you think, potentially, though, if you're handing out contracts of that length that are very lucrative as well, would you be certain that you are attracting the right kind of player? Because surely you'd have their agent and you'd have certain players who are thinking, wow, that is such a brilliant contract and what I'm going to be able to be receiving from this. They'll be attracted to that rather than potentially playing for
Chelsea. I go back to my previous point. If you're spending £50 million on a player, you should be doing plenty of due diligence into that player, which includes checks on their characters as best as you can. So if you're spending £50 million, you are signing an elite footballer. And elite footballers should come with elite mindsets. So that actually shouldn't be the issue. You should be able to look at it from the other flip side. I've signed an 8-year contract. I've got more money than God. Park that in the drawer. All I've got to do is concentrate on playing football to the best of my abilities. I don't have to worry about agents. I don't have to worry about anything else. All I have to concern myself with is keeping my performance levels high. And I'm sure these 8-year contracts are quite, well constructed in terms of bonuses and performances, and if the player plays 50 times for his country, whatever that might look like. So I don't think it will be as simple as some player just sitting on their hands. I don't think players ordinarily do things like that anyway. I don't think that's the norm. But again, if you're spending £50 million, you have every reason to believe that this person is elite, both in their performance and in their mindset.
Would it be something that you'd look to bring in to your policy at Charlton, especially if down the line you realise that it's something that has worked at a club like Chelsea, if it pays off?
I suspect there are things that, it feels to me, Kieran touched on this, that Chelsea are first to market in a lot of the stuff that they're actually doing at the moment. And now a lot of other people look at it and go, oh, crikey, we didn't like that, we better change the rules. It's a little bit like, the way that tax works, isn't it? You get expensive lawyers finding tax loopholes and then HMRC chases behind them to close the loopholes. It feels a little bit like that to me. It's like Kieran said, they have done nothing wrong. They've been early adopters of the existing regulations. And I very much doubt that anybody was involved at Chelsea who voted when those regulations were put in. They've just joined a private members club and said, we'll play by the rules and these are the rules. Now, I think some of those loopholes will get closed. I think that will likely happen. Would we start to do things like that at Charlton? Yeah, well, why not? We try to get our young players on 4-year contracts, 5-year contracts. It's funny, you see, because people come into Charlton and, clearly I think we're an excellent football club. But Charlton isn't always, if you're a young player at the moment, Charlton is a League One football club. So ultimately, a League One football club should never be any young player's destination. That's the next step on the journey. Now, clearly, we hope we sign young players and they take us to the Premier League one day. That would be wonderful. But ultimately, that's a step on the journey. You could argue that Chelsea is the destination. So I get to my destination, I'm here for 8 years. I'm going to focus myself on winning the Premiership, winning Champions Leagues, the things that Chelsea have done previously. So again, I don't think it's unusual. It clearly works from an accounting point of view, but even from a football point of view, it comes with risk. But I don't think it's the craziest thing I've ever heard of in football by any stretch.
Kieran, Jim said there about the loopholes potentially being closed. Is there any sense already that this is going to happen or has already happened in terms of some of those loopholes?
Well, certainly the loophole with regards to player contracts has been dealt with by both UEFA and the Premier League. So now, regardless of the length of the contract, you write off the cost of the transfer over a maximum of 5 years. There was an attempt by the Premier League to change the ability of clubs to sell assets effectively to itself. But that was rejected. They didn't get the requisite numbers, and under the constitution of the Premier League, you need a 2/3 majority. So we now have got inconsistencies. We've seen in the EFL, they changed their rules sort of, I think it was 3 years ago, and that was after Derby, Sheffield Wednesday, Birmingham City, Stoke City had all sold the stadiums to the owner in order to comply with the PSR rules. The UEFA rules, again, are different to those of the Premier League. So that could make things slightly more complicated for Chelsea because the club is participating in European competition this year. But unless there's been a major change in the way that things are worded, there doesn't appear to be an appetite to change this particular issue as far as the Premier League is concerned. And I suspect that's due to some club owners saying, well, hold on, if Chelsea have just got a £70 million advantage in 2023 and potentially a higher one in 2024, why shouldn't we also effectively play out our get out of jail free card with regards to PSR going forwards?
So that's a really important nuance. Sale and lease back in business isn't unusual in most businesses. Lots of businesses do that. That's the point. It's selling it to connected groups within your company for a purpose. I don't think anybody's talking about if Chelsea wanted to sell, their car park to a land developer that wasn't associated to Clearlake, though I'm not sure there are any companies that aren't associated to Clearlake. But if they wanted to do that, that's fine. That's a normal course of business. It's selling it to basically circumnavigate the regulations. That's the issue. And Kieran's quite right. That was outlawed in the EFL a couple of years ago, post things like Derby County, possibly Bury, those types of circumstances. So that's the really important point, selling it to interconnected companies.
Kieran, just quickly on the hotel sale, I believe it led to a bit of a run-in for you and Chelsea to do with an article you wrote. Can you tell us a bit about that?
That's right. I was asked by a well-known satellite broadcaster in this country to write a summary of 6 clubs' finances just before the 30th of June, because the 30th of June has now effectively become the second transfer window as far as the accounts are concerned in terms of compliance with PSR. And the 6 clubs I was asked to look at was Nottingham Forest, Leicester, Aston Villa, Newcastle, Everton and Chelsea. So I wrote this piece and it was all approved and it went up on the website of the broadcaster. And then Chelsea kicked off about it, and my comments were very, very mild. I try to be as objective and analytical as I can, and that makes me a very boring person. But I just said that this is what they've done. They've been very good at player sales, but they probably still had to do something before the end of June. And by all accounts, Chelsea were very unhappy with that, and they encouraged the broadcaster to take down the article, which they subsequently did.
Wow, there we go. Not a boring person at all, Kieran. You're having it out with Chelsea there. Another question I've got for you, though, as well, Kieran, is I think that a lot of Chelsea fans, a lot of the heat goes on to Todd Boehly for the way that the club is run. But if you actually break down the structure of the way that Chelsea as a business is run, who is the top brass? Who are making these decisions?
Todd Boehly is front of house, but he is not the decision maker. Clearlake owns 60% of Chelsea. Eghbali and Boehly own sort of the rest. And from what I understand, Eghbali is now in charge of the Chelsea business. But he doesn't want the limelight. Todd Boehly is an ebullient character. He's very good for a quote, that those quotes then become legend in their own right. And I think he's there to effectively take the heat, whilst the remainder of the business is run by the nerds and the dweebs, which is the way that private equity works. It's very good at acquiring what it considers to be undervalued assets. It's very good at focusing on bringing in additional money and controlling costs, and that's the nature of private equity, with the aim of making a return ultimately for the people who have invested in Clearlake itself.
Jim, just before we move on to some of the financial breaches that Chelsea may have had under Abramovich, I just want to stick on that point about Todd Boehly being the front of house and the public-facing figure. Do you feel, firstly, that there is enough communication from him to the Chelsea supporters? And also, how important is that for an ownership in the modern era to be more communicative with its fans?
I think it depends, like you said, on who's actually making the decisions. Whether it's Todd, whether it isn't, I wouldn't know, to be perfectly honest with you. But clearly, they are very, very heavily involved in running the football club. We have an ownership group that's been excellent for Charlton to date. But they effectively employ us as a management group, and we tend to do the majority of the speaking on their behalf, because we're empowered to make decisions within budgets that they set. Clearly, these budgets look like they're being set by Todd Boehly anyway. And if you want to be front of house, you have an obligation to talk to people and tell people what's going on. That's a fact. If you don't want to be front of house, then no problem at all. Empower the chief executive. Some clubs, you don't hear. Well, you do hear from Khaldoon, but you don't hear from Sheikh Mansour at Man City. But you hear from Khaldoon, you hear from Ferran, you hear from these people. Brighton, for example, predominantly it's Paul Barber, but occasionally it's Tony. It just depends how your football club is structured. The most important thing for me is, in terms of communication with the fans, the people that are actually empowered to make decisions, the people that actually know the answers to the things that the supporters want to know about, and they're the people that are communicating. So if you want to be, if it is Todd Boehly that is the top of the Christmas tree at Chelsea, then I think he probably has an obligation to speak to the fans. That said, I think most Chelsea fans would probably say that Roman Abramovich was an excellent owner, and I don't think anybody heard from Roman Abramovich speak ever, and probably didn't hear from Marina much either. And I don't know personally. I've not had enough communication with new Chelsea. I can tell you who ran old Chelsea. I mean, that was as clear as the nose on your face, to be honest with you. Marina was running Chelsea. That is a fact. If you wanted to do a deal with Chelsea, you spoke to Marina. Marina didn't speak to the press particularly often, though she was incredibly capable at her job. So it's about, I guess, the right people, whoever is empowered within that particular organisation, to pass that message in on and answer the fans' questions.
So that might maybe surprise some Chelsea fans that in your opinion, this was Marina running the show rather than Abramovich at Chelsea.
Well,
I have no doubt at all that if they're going to fire a manager, hire a manager, spend £100 million on a player, whatever that might look like, I have absolutely no doubt that Roman Abramovich was across those types of big decisions. But undoubtedly, Mr. Abramovich clearly empowered Marina to run that football club. I mean, that's what happened. I don't think anybody would dispute that Marina was running that football club, and she was mandated to do so.
Kieran, talking of that Abramovich era and old Chelsea, as Jim put it there, they might learn the fate of a Premier League investigation into some alleged breaches. What kind of breaches are we looking at the moment for Chelsea? Because they're not the only club being investigated.
Well, that's right. In terms of Chelsea, this is the Todd Boehly Clearlake group effectively self-reporting the club with regards to issues which apparently took place or allegedly took place during the Abramovich era. And what these allegations appear to suggest is that there were payments being made either to players or players' representatives, which were not necessarily going through the books of the club itself. They were going through third parties. And if you take a look at the accounts of Chelsea during the Abramovich era, it quite often ended up in the companies controlled in the British Virgin Islands or other offshore places, where the degree of transparency is different to what we're experiencing here in the UK. If that is the case, then I think there are certain parallels with the accusations that have been levelled, or some of the accusations which have been levelled in respect of Manchester City, where once again, people employed by the club were receiving money from third parties. Now, whether that was legitimate or was against the rules is something which we will determine in due course. The Premier League has been silent with regards to any charges against Chelsea to date. So the club is therefore innocent of all these things. But the fact that the story has come out, and presumably it must have been leaked by the hierarchy of Chelsea itself, does suggest that there is an unknown. In addition to that, we have these sales of the real estate assets. Now, have those been at fair value? And then that's the key thing as far as the Premier League is concerned. It did introduce these so-called fair value rules, whereby if you do sell something, then it has to be deemed, anything over £1 million has to be at a market value. Now, a market value for a player, and I'm sure Jim will agree with this, it is quite difficult because players are so unique. I think when it comes to property assets, there tends to be a much bigger market for that. So I think that will be watched with a degree of scrutiny. Having said that, given where Chelsea are located, it is very much prime London estate, and therefore you would think that the club will have done its homework and would have had a report from a surveyor or another professional from the property industry to back up their claims.
And nobody should be under any illusion either. These are serious charges. If Chelsea or Man City, clearly I have no idea whether they did or they didn't, they're all innocent at the moment. If they are found guilty of making these illegal payments, then these are the most serious charges as far as I'm concerned. I think I haven't looked in depth at the 115 Man City charges, but I believe some of the charges are similar, and certainly the charges at Chelsea relate to payments outside of contracts. If they are found guilty of that, the sanctions, this is not slap on the wrist territory. These are some serious sanctions.
Well, how serious could these sanctions be, in your opinion?
I mean, that would be pure speculation. All I do know is that they are serious. This isn't slap on the wrist stuff. This is, footballers have to get paid. Okay, they can have image rights agreements which have been tied up on now, but they can only be paid by the entity that is the football club, the UK entity that is the football club. They pay all the PAYE at source, and that money has to be paid into a UK bank account. That much is quite clear. Anything that's being diverted from other companies, that is highly irregular in football terms. And if these football clubs are found guilty of these things, I think they are going to have some significant issues. Even though Chelsea's self-reported, and I suppose that's a mitigating fact, it's still Chelsea Football Club, regardless of who the ownership is. You buy the football club, warts and all. Whoever, it is still Chelsea Football Club that made those payments, if indeed they were made illegally. So it would still be Chelsea Football Club that copped for it effectively.
Kieran, it's interesting that Jim brings up that Chelsea did self-report themselves. Do you think that they did that because, as Jim says, these are very serious charges? So do you think that they did that in order to potentially get some leniency if it does come to the fact that they are guilty of these charges? Is it a way to potentially make the punishment less?
I think it's the equivalent of handing yourself in at a police station as part of a mitigation. As Jim correctly said, ultimately it's Chelsea FC Limited or Chelsea FC Holdings or whatever the iteration of the company is in previous years that has had a potential breach. With regards to a punishment, I think you have to look at it through two issues. First of all, were the monies involved sufficient to have resulted in Chelsea exceeding the PSR limits? If the answer to that is no, because we could be talking, yes, it could be £2 or £3 million, but Chelsea was still within the limits, then you're likely to have some form of financial penalty. But if we take a look at the closer look at the commissions that investigated both Everton and Nottingham Forest, they effectively concluded that anything which results in a club exceeding the PSR limits should be given a points deduction based tariff. So we'd have to go and wait and see. And again, we have to reiterate that Chelsea have done nothing wrong in the sense that they've not been charged with anything to date.
Jim, whilst we've got you here, and if we park the Chelsea chat for just a moment, they've gone through a big change in ownership, and it's been similar for Charlton as well. You're the managing director and the chairman. It's been a very good start to the season, as we said earlier as well. How is the day-to-day running of the football club at the moment?
It's good. It's a challenge. Running League One football clubs is never easy. Running any football club isn't. These things are never easy. We tend to be loss-making entities, but we're very fortunate. We have quite a diverse ownership group. They've been incredibly supportive of everything that we've done. And our first season, it's just over a year since we took control of Charlton Athletic, and it wasn't always easy. Things weren't easy on the pitch last year. That transfers off the pitch. But we seem to have, we appointed Nathan Jones, ex of Brighton, ex of Charlton, ex of Brighton, and things have come full circle for Nathan. We appointed Nathan at the beginning of February. And one of the things we were very conscious about wasn't just about getting results at the back end of last season, or the second half of last season. It was about having the ability to plan effectively and plan a recruitment strategy and plan for pre-season. We had two choices to make. Did we want an interim manager that was going to earn us points until the end of the season, or did we want a manager for the long haul? And I was always a big proponent of the of the long haul, because especially if there was a candidate we thought we could significantly improve the football club, it gives you that ability to plan. And at the moment, we're only 3 games in, but at the moment we seem to be seeing the effects of that. Our squad predominantly has got through pre-season. They've worked really hard, and we're seeing the fruits of that on the pitch in these early days. But I'm a big planner. Our planning for pre-season the following season started the moment Nathan came in the door. So that really for us was that sort of change in mindset. That gave us the ability to plan. People think the season finishes and everybody goes on holiday. It just isn't like that. It's the most crucial part of the season, as I'm concerned, the close season, because it's the only chance you get to change things. The players go off, they have the holidays, but it gives us a chance to kind of change your mindset. We've done a lot of work at the football club, working on cultures and the behaviours in change, and how important all the other things are at the football club, as well as the sort of men's first team. We have an incredibly successful women's team. We have an incredibly successful academy. Our community trust is one of the best in the countries. And these are all things that our ownership supports in the same way as it supports the thing that grabs all the headlines is clearly the men's first team, because you see our KPIs every Saturday night at 5 o'clock. But we've been on a bit of a journey. Last year was a whirlwind. We bought the football club, or we took control of the football club at the worst time you could ever do it, which was about 5 days before the season started. And everybody's drank the Kool-Aid, everybody's high on hope, and then you lose a few football matches and you think, crikey, and I've been in this position many times before, so I maybe drank a bit less Kool-Aid than other people, but nevertheless, that euphoria quickly wears away when maybe results aren't quite going your way. But at the moment, we've won a few games of football. We are far from cracked it, and we go to Reading at the weekend in a good place. Yeah, we just want to get this transfer window out of the way, and we'll move on from there.
I just want to ask you about one of the co-owners and the CEO at the moment, in Charlie Medford, because the last time he was involved with the football club was Sunderland. It was very public because it was part of that Netflix documentary, Sunderland Till I Die. Eventually that season wasn't quite successful for them as well. Do you think that there's certain things that he learnt from that experience, whether that was to do with, being public facing, or whether it was to do with the running of the football? Were there certain things that he learnt from that experience that he's taken into this job at Charlton?
Well, I mean, you'd have to ask Charlie that. Obviously, Charlie is our chief executive. We're thrilled to have him. I mean, like all of us, we all learn and we all grow, and smart people normally learn from things that didn't quite go the way that they wanted for them. But ultimately, you look at Sunderland, and I had a spell as chief executive at Sunderland, great football club, after that period of time. And again, it's not easy. I was there through the entire pandemic. And, Charlie and Stuart Donald, they did some really impressive stuff at Sunderland. When they actually bought Sunderland, they'd been relegated to League One. The cost base was mind-blowing. I think they had 1 year left of the parachute payment, basically to try to make sense of the football club financially. Then the pandemic hit. So, and ultimately the football club was sold to a very good owner in Kieran Louis-Dreyfus. So the football club, we've had a good start to the season. They've had they've had the same start to the season, which is wonderful for Sunderland and their supporters. But listen, Charlie's a smart guy. Charlie learns from all the things, good and bad, the same as we all do. But where hopefully Charlie is a really important part of the team at Charlton Athletic.
Gentlemen, I want to turn our attention to the world of transfers now as well. We've seen a lot less spending this summer from Premier League clubs. I think at the moment the figure is around 800 million less than we've usually seen. Kieran, I'll start with you. Do you think we've entered an austerity era for transfers at the moment?
Not necessarily. There's always a Kickstarter as far as the transfer market is concerned, which then starts to have a ripple effect. Now, we've seen this in the past couple of summers with regards to the creation of the Saudi Pro League and the recruitment of players, which has pumped money into the Premier League, but also into the other European markets, has allowed those clubs that have been selling to Saudi to then buy players, and the clubs that they've bought can then buy players and so on. That's not been the case. There's not been a stellar transfer over the course of the summer. We did see clubs acknowledging the impact of PSR, and that was very much with the effectively sort of moving the chess pieces around just before the 30th of June. But that has resulted in clubs being perhaps a little bit cautious. Also, if you take a look at the clubs that have been promoted, Ipswich have been decent spenders, certainly record spenders by the history of the club. But the other clubs that have come up been perhaps a little bit more modest. And there's been I think there's been no desire from clubs, with the exception of Chelsea, to adopt the spend model. Brighton have spent a lot of money by their standards, but effectively it's the Caicedo and the Cucurella money being spent in this particular window. We've still got a few days to go, and there are certainly budgets which are unfulfilled in terms of taking the clubs to the limit. So, I estimated we've probably spent around about 1.6 billion to date in the Premier League as far as the markets are concerned. That is, 700-800 million pounds, as you rightly said, Ollie, compared to last year. But remember, last year also included the January window, and we could still see Manchester United making a statement signing. We could see some interesting swap deals take place, which will again effectively increase the value of the market and so on.
I think most of the spending's been in League One this season. That's the place to have a look at where the real spending's gone. It's going to be an interesting time in League One. But by League One standards,
a lot of it at Birmingham.
Birmingham look like they've spent well. But it's going to be an exciting division this season. Very competitive. We've got the glitz and glamour of Wrexham and obviously Birmingham, and we will just try to hang on to their coattails and see where it takes us, I think.
Our very own Simon Jordan, Jim, has often talked about the fact that eventually this spending and the increased inflation of it was eventually going to catch up with football. Now, whether that's arrived because of, the PSR rules or clubs having to be a bit more stringent because of the rules in place, do you think we're coming to that kind of period?
Well, you could imagine at the EFL meetings that I go to, the word that is bandished about the most is sustainability. And it's like the oxymoron of the profit and sustainability rules. Well, they're neither profitable nor sustainable, are they? It's crazy. I think this is all part of the conversation that's ongoing at the moment, isn't it? About the new deal and the regulator and the deal between the Premier League and the EFL. But it's all very well at the EFL if we, it would be wonderful to have a redistribution of funds that gives us a bit more money in the EFL. Clearly, that's something we would be fully supportive of. But if you're going to do that, you actually have to have cost control that works. Nobody's suggesting for one moment that footballers shouldn't get paid properly. They are the product at the end of the day. But there is enough money in football to pay everybody properly. There is enough money going around. It might not be quite allocated in the right places at the moment. So my point is, if there is a new deal, then clearly that has to be done in tandem with cost controls throughout the EFL that really do work, or it just becomes like prune juice. The money comes in the top, it goes straight out the bottom. You end up paying the same players to do exactly the same job. It makes no sense when we should be, looking at maybe things like ticket pricing and our stadium improvements and our academy and our women's team and all the other things that we have to spend money on. But I'm a big advocate of paying footballers absolutely what they're worth. But is it coming to that point? I sit in EFL meetings back in June, and we all come out and we talk about sustainability, and then a few weeks later the market in League One goes crazy, and I guess it's us guys that are to blame for that. But does it? I mean, it does need to cool. It needs to get more sensible, because there is plenty of money in football to pay everybody properly. It's just the allocation of it needs looking at, and hopefully eventually the Premier League and the Football League can get round the table and they can come up with agreement. But I shan't hold my breath right now.
What are your views on an independent regulator in football? Well,
I think it's a shame, to be honest with you. I think it's actually a shame that we need an independent regulator. I think we've proved that we do need one. We've not managed to get our own house in order, so that's why these things become apparent. I do have, and this is, I don't think, a political statement, whether it's this government or the previous government, do I have a lot of faith that a regulator is going to act effectively? Well, we have them in water and energy and God knows what, and I'm not sure that looking out at the Thames, that our water regulator is anything to shout about. So listen, we live in hope. If the regulator can get the parties round the table to come to a sensible resolution, I should be the first one to applaud it. But you work in football a long time, you become a professional cynic, I guess. But my cup is always half full, so fingers crossed.
Kieran, would you go along with that? Are you also cynical about an independent regulator, or do you think it would be a good thing?
I think you've got to look at things on balance. You've got to look at the cost of running the regulator, because ultimately that's money which is being taken out of football. But I think there's things that the regulator can do that the present three governing bodies that we have in football have struggled to do. And as Jim was saying, that there's not agreement between the EFL and the Premier League with regards to distribution. Football is an incredibly successful product. If we take a look at the rise of the Premier League, since it started in 1992, revenues have increased by 2,800%, which during a period where inflation in general was just doubled is fantastic. The problem is during exactly that same period, wages have increased by 3,800% in the Premier League and 1,000% in the Championship. So it's dealing with those costs. And I agree entirely with what Jim's saying with regards to sustainability, but if Nathan Jones comes knocking on his door in January and Charlton are still in the top 2 or 3 of League One, and he says, "Look, I've spotted this lad. He's 22 years old. I think he could really make a difference. He could get us promoted this season. He's going to cost 400 grand from this club, and I've already sounded him out. And he's looking for 8 grand a week, and that's above our budget." Then that puts Jim and it puts the owners in a really awkward position, because we all love football because we love the product and we love seeing our teams win. And saying no to managers in those circumstances has proven to be a really tough gig for many chief executives and owners in recent years, and that's why we've got sort of the casino football that we see, especially in the Championship, with clubs paying £180 in wages for every £100 that comes in, and in the case of Reading it was over 200.
What worries me about that statement from Kieran is that that's worryingly close to the conversations that go on a daily basis with Nathan. I think Kieran might have my office bugged. I'm going to have it swept later. Very, very worrying. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he's already had a run-in with Chelsea. I'm not sure he's going to go after Charlton as well. Kieran, just going back to transfers, you mentioned that bizarre day, the 30th of June, that PSR deadline day, where clubs like Newcastle and Aston Villa and Forest and Chelsea were all doing these deals in order to make sure they were within the guidelines. It's something we went into actually on episode 1 of How Football Works with David Ornstein and Matt Hughes. So it's worth a watch if you want a breakdown of what happened. But in terms of that going forward, do you think that as the rules are potentially changing, that was just a one-off, or do you think it's something that we could see regularly going forward?
I think the commoditisation of academy players will continue, because if we take a look at the proposed alignment, especially of the Premier League rules in relation to those of UEFA, transfer spend, sort of on a net basis, is one of the parameters, is one of the KPIs which are used in the overall formula. We've seen it in respect of other clubs in Europe who have effectively had to go and sell before they buy, and they're quite careful as to the nature of the players that they're letting go. So that will be one issue. It will be interesting to see when the rules are changed, and I think it is going to be an inevitability whether or not we move to alignment with UEFA, because UEFA's has now moved to a calendar year rather than a seasonal year when they do their assessments of clubs. And if that is the case, then I don't think there'll be as much of a need to sell players by the end of a financial year, because ultimately it's what you do in the year to the 31st of December which will count. And if that is the case, my life's going to be very miserable, because the clubs don't produce the accounts at the 31st of December, so everybody's going to start making up numbers.
Yeah, I heard some horror stories coming out of the Premier League about the 29th and 30th of June this year, and we were trying to buy a player from a Premier League club at just about that time, and even trying to get a response out of them and a phone call. And it wasn't them being rude; they were just, listen, we are nose to the grindstone here. We are having absolute murders, and it is a space that could potentially get exploited by unscrupulous agents. It's as simple as that. It is absolute manna for heaven for some particular agents, June the 30th. But yeah, I agree with Kieran. I think that's something they have to get away from. I think it's an unintended consequence that people hadn't really given thought to, and it becomes incredibly dangerous. So I'd imagine that the Premier League will go in that UEFA direction. I'd be surprised if they don't.
Jim, what's your current view on the way that transfer windows are structured? And as we've just mentioned there, you've ended up with that strange deadline day that isn't a deadline day. What's your current view on how it all works?
I hate transfer windows. I'm old enough to remember when we didn't have a transfer window. Everything seemed to work perfectly fine then. I've still never really understood why we have a transfer window. I guess people say it's stability.
Should we go back to that, in your opinion?
I haven't given it enough thought, to be honest with you, but regardless of my opinion, I don't think it'll be happening anytime soon. No, so my view is quite simple with the transfer window. It goes on, the summer transfer window goes on far too long. You end up having meaningless conversations for weeks and weeks and weeks. Then eventually something might get done. And it's like all deadlines. People will wake up on Friday and go, crikey, we've got a deadline tonight. And for me, it just goes on far too long. It has to close before the season starts, though. You know, we have to do that. We have to be aligned with Europe, so I'm not sure that can be achieved either. It just goes on for too long. I understand I guess it's good for the media. It's good that keeps people talking about it. But trying to get people to make decisions, you know, the amount of players and agents that I speak to that think that Sir Alex Ferguson is going to come out of retirement and take them back to Man United, it just becomes completely unrealistic. You know, I always say you might as well turn your phone off in May, because you're not really going to sign players. You can't really do deals. So for me, it goes on far too long. And January is the same. You could have a week in January. You'd still get deals done. The same amount of deals would still get done in a week as get done in a month. And the other thing that drives me crazy, and I think it puts undue pressure on people, is why you have a transfer deadline at 11 o'clock at night. Just have the same deadline at 5 o'clock. And the same amount of deals will get done. Things will just get done quicker. I mean, that's what happens with deadlines. People wait until deadlines. So to me, it's a bit of I think it is a construct for the media. I think it becomes exciting for probably this outlet and other similar media outlets. But for me, as you can see, I'm fatigued at the moment. I have transfer deadline fatigue, and I cannot wait until 1 minute past 11. On Friday to breathe a huge sigh of relief.
Just incidentally, you can watch transfer deadline day coverage live on Friday on talkSPORT, and I'm sure you'll be tuned in, won't you, Jim?
I'll be tuned into everything. Yes, hopefully to look at what Premier League clubs are selling players and what salons we've got. That tends to be that could be my most interesting viewing. Yeah.
Kieran, just before we move on, I want to ask you about the Saudi Pro League and their impact in terms of the transfer market. But I just wanted to ask you, in your opinion, whether you agree with Jim there that, particularly on that point, that the transfer window should stop before the season starts.
I think it's an interesting one because the Premier League did change its own rules sort of 3 or 4 years ago and then immediately reversed them. The concern amongst some clubs, and I think this is particularly amongst the smaller clubs in the Premier League, and therefore has a ripple effect into the Championship as well, is that if you start the season, second week in August, and you've got two injuries or something's not worked out with a player who was due to come in, and that transfer has started to go toxic, then it's a long wait until the 1st of January. All of a sudden, you've not got a left back for the rest of the season. So that's why the original intention, and I can absolutely understand it from Jim's point of view, and also from that of other chief executives as well, to get the window sorted before the start of the season was reversed. It was felt that the clubs had to actually have bigger squads. Because there was that much bigger a gap between the end of the summer window and the start of the January window. And that was the driver. In relation to the Saudi Pro League, I think its window doesn't expire until October. So we could still see some movement after the 31st of August here.
Well, let's talk about the Saudi Pro League as well, because last summer we saw them spend almost 700 million on players. This time the spending has been less so. What would you put that down to, first of all?
I think the level of interest in terms of attendances, apart from the major clubs with the Galacticos, has been quite modest. So whilst there is to a certain extent an unlimited budget, there's no desire from the club owners and also from the Saudi Pro League itself for the losses to be astronomical and to increase from their current levels. There's also the feeling, I think, in some clubs that there was a Saudi Pro League tax effectively being charged by European clubs, and they don't want that to be repeated. It could arguably be the case that there's been a Premier League tax in terms of the prices quoted to Premier League clubs, and you talk to some of Jim's colleagues, and they say, we feel that we are being exploited by other markets who know that we've got big pockets from which to spend. So I think the market will continue into September as far as the Saudi Pro League is concerned, trying to get broadcast deals as well to make that a more global product has to go hand in hand with the ability to spend. So we'll wait and see, but I'm certainly not anticipating huge transfer fees. We could still see some very high profile transfers themselves, but that could be similar to what we've seen, players perhaps towards the end of their careers. The experience of the players has been mixed. We saw Jordan Henderson go to Saudi, and that didn't work out for him. And I think it was sort of it was off-field issues in terms of family settling in and so on. So therefore, some players might take the view that they, as we saw with Alisson recently, say, he had the opportunity potentially to go there, but playing in front of 60,000 people at Anfield, and he is handsomely paid because he's an elite athlete and deserves every penny that he gets, is enough for him. It might be different from a few other players, but there can be surely no better feeling for a top level player to be in front of full grounds, and they love playing football, and they love the dynamics of the fans who turn a piece of architecture into a living, breathing organism with the noise and the passion that's created.
Jim, one player who's currently being linked with a move to Saudi, a very lucrative one as well, is Ivan Toney from Brentford, who a player I think was on your books at one point.
Yeah. I've signed Ivan twice.
When you look at that deal, firstly, are you surprised that might be the destination, or does it make sense to you, given the amount of wages that he might be able to pick up out there?
The thing that doesn't make sense to me is why there doesn't appear to have been that much more interest in him in the Premier League. I think Ivan's an exceptional player. I know Ivan well. As a human being, I think he's great. I think he's misunderstood at times. He's been on a tough journey. To go from where he's gone, he played for me twice at Scunthorpe in two very good teams and was exceptional twice. We didn't manage to sign him on a full-time basis because Barry Fry beat me to it, the devil, at the time. But, you know, what he's actually gone on to achieve, I have nothing but admiration for. And I actually think he's a player that would improve many, many teams in the Premier League. I really do. So I'm slightly surprised that that hasn't happened. Ivan's come late to the game. His, you know, best earning years are in front of him. And I guess Ivan has to decide, you know, what are the more important things for him, as was eloquently stated there by Kieran. Is it the passion, 60,000 people at Spurs or Arsenal or Man United or wherever it is? Because Ivan can play for any of those teams and improve them. I'm absolutely convinced of that. Or do you take the money and you go to Saudi Arabia? Because let's be quite clear about it, that is why you go to Saudi Arabia. There's no shame in that whatsoever. Money is desperately important to all of us. I think the thing that we don't know is there's all this sort of rumour that he's asking for too much money. You don't know. You don't know what is on the table for him. I would think that the one thing that I do know that talkSPORT's Darren McAntony will be very keen that Ivan gets sold this window so he can get his lucrative sell-on agreement. So Darren will be looking quite understandably. I would love, just me personally, knowing Ivan the guy, I would love to see Ivan playing for an Arsenal, a Liverpool, a Man United, leaving the line, because he has that type of personality as well. One, I think he's good enough, but two, he has that personality to play for a really, really big football club. And I was having this debate yesterday with my Arsenal season ticket holding friend, and I said, I just think Ivan gives Arsenal something that they haven't got. He might not quite fit their model in terms of age, what the money that he wants, what Brentford want. Clearly, I have no idea. I read the same newspapers as you do. All I know, he improves all of those teams. But at the end of the day, if he wants to decide to go to Saudi Arabia, I'll know where to go to tap him up for a loan.
And Darren McAntony will be joining us next time on How Football Works, so I'm sure we'll pick his brain on that. Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed, Jim Rodwell and Kieran Maguire. It's been an absolute pleasure. That's it from us this week. If you want to get involved, post your comments below and our expert panel will answer them as best they can. Thank you very much for your company, and thanks to our panellists once again, Jim Rodwell and Kieran Maguire. See you next time.